Thank you so much, and it is a pleasure to be here. Now, I often like to start with this photo, which Margot shared a little glimpse of it in that lovely collage you did for me. But here's the bigger version, and Margot was mentioning in my introduction that I got to go to the United Nations in New York. So this was in the year of 2006, and I'm not sure if you can remember back to that, but the UN had called the year of 2005 the Year of Sport. And they were using sport around the world to promote peace, development, health and education. And this was the closing ceremony of that year, and it was a big ceremony. They had about 1,000 people join, and the ministers of sport had come to this ceremony to give their reports to Kofi Annan, who you can see in the middle, in the blue suit, to say what they'd done with the power of sport to help these 4 areas. And of course, at something like this, they wanted 4 athletes to speak. And you probably look at that photo now as I say that, and you're probably trying to think of who the other 3 athletes could be. You might be able to spot me in that photo at the back. Can anyone see another athlete that they may recognise? Federer, yes. Can you see Federer? He's to my left. Now, if you can have a little bit of a closer look, can you see he's trying to check me out? I love that photo. Look, I don't know if he was. I don't think he was at all. His wife wasn't too far away. However, when it came back, I went, look at that. What a great photo to have. And the other athlete is the guy to the left of Roger. Pele was supposed to be there, which is a bit of a shame not to meet Pele, but Elias Figueroa is the guy next to Roger, and he's from Chile. He's one of their best soccer players of all time. And the other athlete, who do you think the other athlete would be? Just out of interest, who would you pick? I can hear some mumbles. Did I say someone at the back next to me? Does someone think that person? He was the singer, so he's not the athlete. Second choice. The other female. The other female, well done. Well done, because often people find that one a bit tricky to pick out, but it is the other female in the front row, and her name is Tegla Larupe, and she's from Kenya. And when you go along to these functions, a bit like today, if you're networking and you've met people for the first time, you might ask them a question of how did you get involved in education and teaching and what you do, and that's exactly what we did. And when I got to meet Tegla for the first time, she came up to about here on me, and she's about 40 kilos, she's tiny, and I asked her that question, tell me your story, like how did you get involved in sport? How come you're here today? And I wasn't expecting, I should have thought more about her answers, but this is what she said to me. She said, Katrina, I'm one of 24 siblings. That was their first response. She said, my part of Kenya, we live in a remote village. It's okay for my father to have more than one wife. I think there was 4 in their family, so it wasn't one miraculous woman. I think most of the women probably went, oh, it's 24 babies. But yeah, 24. But if she wanted to go to school, at the age of 5, you can probably guess, and you might have heard these stories before, how far she would have to walk or run. What do you reckon? 10 kilometres to school just to get an education and then come back again at night. 20 kilometres a day. And I get really embarrassed when I tell this story because I actually went to Murray High School and we lived about 500 metres away, and I was always late because I think the closer you are, the later you are. And I would always have to say, Mum, can you put your dressing gown on, because she was never dressed. Quick, you've got to drive me to school. Because I just couldn't get my act together being so close. But she would have to walk or run, and she ran, and she learned how to run like many Kenyans do. And she made her first Olympic Games without a pair of shoes. She ran at her first Olympics without shoes. She went on to run at a few Olympic Games, and she has won every marathon you could probably win around the world, and she was the first African woman to break a world record, I think for the 25-kilometre distance. Now, the reason why I share this story is, okay, she has a wonderful story, but what she does now, she has her own peace foundation, and she builds schools and uses the power of sport to make a difference for kids that have been orphaned. And the opportunity that she's had through sport to make a difference, to give a chance for kids to have education so they can have a chance of life, for me, touched me. And I realised at that moment there is a big power for me as an athlete to really help make a difference through others through my sporting journey. I share this story because that is a great story, but I also share this story because I look at that photo and think, how on earth did I get in that photo? You know, I grew up in Adelaide. I lived in Salisbury East. I went to Kelleroe Primary School. In Year 6, I moved to Murraybridge South Primary School, did Year 7 there, then went to Murraybridge High School. And as you've heard, if you don't know my story yet, I'm a Paralympian, so you obviously realise I have a disability. And I think, how on earth did I get in that photo all the way from Adelaide? And when I thought about it, and probably from those years since, there's 3 core things, and there's a story about how I got there as well. You've got to know people, you've got to have a profile, and you've got to have results. But there's 3 strong values that really drive me, that continue to drive me, that I think made the difference for me in terms of getting to in this position. The first one is about embracing and driving change. And this is things that I work on every day to make sure that I keep improving myself. What can I do to continue to embrace change? It's going to happen, but how can I also drive change? Because innovation is change that makes good. What can I do differently? And if change is going to happen, how can I be with it and go with it and then be the best I can be with that? Which leads me to my second point is, what can I do every day to be the best I can be with what I have? What can I do every day to learn, to grow, to improve my own self? Because that's what I've got control over. If I can be the best me, then I can help others and perform better in business and in life. And the third one is, in every decision that I look at, the really strong value for me is, how am I making a difference for others? And I know for you guys to be in this industry, that would have to be one of your strong values. How are you making a difference for others? So when you look at those, if you're embracing and driving change and you're being the best you can be, of course, if you get those first 2 right, you will make a better difference for others in what you do by taking responsibility for yourself. So they're the 3 things that really drive me and did make a difference for me in terms of getting into this photo. But I also share this photo because this is something I never ever thought I could achieve, because I didn't even know it existed. I'm a very good goal setter, as many athletes are. We learn to goal set through sport, and I still set very, it's a big important part of my year to set goals in all aspects of my life. But this was something that wasn't on my list of goals. Why? Because you can't set a goal for this. This is something that you can't even apply for. This is something that just happens. And you get a phone call one day and you get asked the question, could you be across there? And it's amazing. But I sat down and thought, well, wow, I didn't even know that existed. So this has gone beyond my goals. And if I can achieve that, if I can be that young girl that grows up in Salisbury East, that moves to Murray Bridges from Adelaide, and I can get next to Roger Federer at the UN through my story and through how I'm living my life, then what else can I achieve? So I posed that question to you all at the start of my talk is, what could your photo be that you don't even know that exists yet? Because this is how I motivate myself. Even now, I haven't competed for nearly 10 years. How do I continue to motivate and improve myself every year? What motivates me? And one of those things is thinking about, I wonder what my photo could be this year. I wonder what's going to happen to me that I don't even know exists yet. But if I'm following my goals and I keep pushing my boundaries, I wonder what's going to happen. The next shot is just to share with you something that I had no idea I was going to do. This was November last year. I found myself in Nepal. Now I don't have time to tell you all the background of this story, but you may have heard about this book. It's a senior school book. It's called Sold by Patricia McCormack. It may be in your schools. It's an incredible story about a young Nepalese girl that gets sold into sexual slavery into India. It's really an amazing read. They've made a movie out of it, and I got to attend the red carpet premiere in Nepal. This is me in Nepal. This is me in a village, a beautiful village called Surmathang in the district of Sindapalchuk, which is actually where the epicentre of the earthquake hit. And these are some of the beautiful children that I got to meet. I've become an ambassador for an organisation called ChildReach, and ChildReach use 3 core values of making sure they help children grow over there. They look at their health, they look at education, and they look at child rights. And I don't know if anyone knows much about Nepal, but if you're a teacher in Nepal, it means you couldn't get a job anywhere else. There is no education for teachers. It's kind of the worst job you can get. So ChildReach are actually teaching teachers to be teachers. And so I've had this incredible experience of actually working over there with this organisation. My photo this year will be this photo that's coming up in October. We're heading back there in October to do a Rebuild Nepal trek, and we were going to go to Base Camp Everest, but it's not on the list obviously after the earthquake, but we will go to this peak, which is about 4,000 metres. This is just a group of Danish students that went across there late last year. And this is a photo of something that we will do this year. So this is the school here To the left hand, sorry, the picture on the right hand side in the top right corner is the school that I visited last year. It just got rebuilt and had been bombed by the Maoist and was closed for 9 years. They took ages to rebuild it. It's only been open for 5 years, and you can see the state of the school there now. I now have the opportunity to go over there and help rebuild this school, which is just amazing. I never knew that this would be my life. And it motivates me, and I keep being excited about what next. So I'm going to pose that question to you. You know, what could that photo be for you? Maybe this time next year. Could it be a photo of some results in your area or your school that you have no idea that you could reach? Could it be a photo of a student that you're hoping that they could improve, that they do something that is just unbelievably incredible? Because our teachers are, they're continuing to improve and doing a great job. So that's just a question for you all. So let me tell you a little bit about, if you've never heard my story, and I'm going to do the really quick 10-minute version of how I got to that point. So this is a photo of me on the left-hand side. But if you don't know my story, and you've heard I'm a Paralympian and you don't know why, I bet you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to check me out, a bit like Roger Federer was, trying to work out what is wrong with me. Yeah, hands up if you've been trying to do that, because it's always nice to see everyone. You can be honest, it's okay. And so if you don't know what's wrong with me, I actually have a mild case of cerebral palsy on my right side. And the unique part of my story is that I didn't know I had cerebral palsy. I didn't know it was called that until I was 18 years of age at the Australian Institute of Sport on an able-bodied netball scholarship. So I always knew I had something wrong, but my parents were never ever told that it was called cerebral palsy. So here's just a little bit of the background. At the age of 2, my grandmother noticed that I was limping, and we went off to see my local doctor, and he didn't pick up anything, but he said, a year later, come back. If it hasn't got any better, we'll send you off to a specialist, and that's what happened. I went off to a specialist, and it was diagnosed that I'd suffered some very, very mild brain damage on the left side of my brain, and that's what was causing the limping on the right side of my body. It wasn't a major issue, I think, because it was so mild that, and the term cerebral palsy was never ever mentioned. But what the doctor did say to my mum and dad is I'd have to wear one of these little plasters to bed on my right foot just to make sure my calf muscle didn't tighten up. So there's a shot of me of wearing that night plaster to bed. I had to wear it to bed every night until I stopped growing, and I'm just under 6 foot. So if you want to know how many nights that was, it was about 3,000 nights. It was about 72,000 hours. I can even tell you the minutes and the seconds if you really want to know. But that's the only thing I really had to do. And for me, luckily, I suppose, I was born reasonably talented. When I think back to my school years, I was good academically. I was always one of those kids that would always be reading the books above to the next year level. I was just a good worker. I loved learning, and you can probably just see that now. I love just trying to be the best I can be. And so when I think back to my school days, being at school, I could kind of, and I'm very general about this, I never had too many issues growing up in school because I was okay academically, and you can kind of fit in when you're okay like that, and particularly when you're in a country town, and I was also reasonably good at sport. And I think, I don't know if this is still the way, but if you're coordinated and you can handle schoolwork okay, you can fit in, if I say that, very general. This is my sporting genes. I don't know if anyone barracks for North Adelaide still, but that's my father with a curly blonde hair. He played for North Adelaide in the 70s. He won the 71-72 premiership at this oval, and they went on to beat Carlton to become the Australian premiers in 72, so he was a pretty good athlete. Played alongside of Barry Robran in that era. And does anyone know who the female is in the green and gold, number 14, playing basketball? Rachel Spawn. So my mum's maiden name is Spawn. Rachel's dad and my mum are brother and sister, so Rachel's my first cousin. So I was lucky enough to be born with some reasonably good sporting skills. So when I think, to my years at school, even though I had this weakness on my right side and it was diagnosed of having, some mild brain damage, because I had the academic ability and the ability to do sport, I could fit in. My school years were great. But I do remember my early, probably around 10 or 11, those years where you start to explore yourself a little bit more, maybe compare to other kids. I remembered actually how this affected me. I remember that moment where I went, oh wow, okay, I can move my right toes. I can only just move them, but I can't curl them over. yet I can do it so easily on my left side. And you're probably sitting there doing it now, just checking out whether you can do it, right? If you can do it on both sides, it's really easy to do. But I know how easy it is because I can feel how easy it is to do it on my left side, but I cannot do it on my right side. And I remember going to my parents and asking them, why can't I curl my toes over? And they actually didn't know. Because I don't know if you guys have had kids, have you ever checked whether your kids could curl their toes over? Probably not, except if you're Katrina Webb and you have 3 sons like me. The first one comes out, yes, he can curl his toes. The second one, he can curl his toes. And my third one is nearly 2. He actually can curl his toes, so we're okay. But it was, that really distinct moment of, wow, I can't do something. And if you can't curl your toes, your balance is pretty ordinary, which I can demonstrate, but I won't now. I can't do a calf raise very well. Actually, I will, because you probably like to see it. So if I stand here on my good side, this is what my balance is like. It should be normal. I can do a calf raise. But if I come to my right side, you can see I have to increase my base of support. I can't look at you. And to even think about coming up on my toes takes all of my energy. But I can do it both sides because my left does all the work. So growing up, I realised there were these things that I couldn't do very well, and I had this plaster that I had to wear and no one else had to wear, and I hated it. And the biggest thing that bothered me in this age, when I worked out all of this, was because my right leg is a little bit thinner because it can't work as hard as my left, and that was the thing, as a young female, that bothered me the most. Because you can't see it, and I didn't really understand what it was, and I was fitting in, I just didn't want people to know that I was different. Yeah? I didn't want people to think I was broken. And I remember as a young kid having those thoughts of, gee, if people know that my body doesn't work properly or I am a bit different, then maybe I won't fit in. So I'll just work my hardest to make sure no one will ever find out. So my parents weren't allowed to tell anybody, except my immediate family, that I wore this. So I'd hide it if a friend would come to stay. Or if I'd had to go to the physio to get a new one made, I was going to the dentist because it was always in school hours. Or if we were doing health hustle, like all of the teachers used to make us do. Yeah, remember the old health hustles? This was me stretching my quads. So you'd say, stretch your quads, and I'd go. And then you'd say, okay, change legs, and I'd go. Because if I did the other side, I'm terrible at it, and you'd see that I'm different, and people would, tease me and stir me up. So as a young kid, that's how I dealt with it. The best thing that came out of that, though, was because I didn't want people to find out, I worked hard. Yeah, I worked hard physically. I was a good young netballer, but I did extra sessions. I went out and trained extra just so I could keep up or learn the skill, because it just took me a little bit longer to learn things. But once I've learned it, I can nail it. And I started to realise that then I could be pretty good physically. And that led me to actually applying for a scholarship at the Australian Institute of Sport after Year 12 to go live in Canberra to see if I could do that, and I actually got it. I was one of 12 girls chosen from around Australia to move to Canberra in the year of 1995 to play netball full-time, which was pretty exciting. This is a really quick version of my story. I headed across there 17, turning 18 years of age. This was the year that completely changed my life. Firstly, I got a really good knee injury that I never had before, but made sense because we were doing a lot more increased court time. And my right leg just doesn't have any good shock absorption. So the load just would come through my tendon and I started to break down. But the most interesting thing happened in that year was I found out that this thing that I had was actually called cerebral palsy. And as soon as that was labelled, it didn't change anything for me, but as soon as it was labelled, the word got around very quickly to a coach who was coaching athletes with a disability called Chris Nunn. And I think some of you probably know Chris because he trained as a teacher in South Australia. And then you can imagine when he heard this news, he was pretty excited to think, wow, this girl has got this far in able-bodied sport or non-disabled sport. Imagine if she's eligible for the Paralympic Games. She could be awesome if she can come across to the Paralympic movement. So that's where things, changed for me. I found out I was eligible. And to be honest, when I first found out I was eligible for the Paralympic Games, I wasn't excited and pumped up. Here I was as an 18-year-old female expecting to play netball, hiding this thing I hated about myself. And as soon as I heard that term Paralympic athlete in the year of 1995, this is a long time ago, what were the thoughts that came into my head? People will know that I'm different. If I become a Paralympian, people know that I have a disability and there's something wrong with me. And that just turned on all of my voices of fear and all of my voices of judgment. And I was really scared. But this was the first time I got to speak to a sports psychologist, and I sat down with a psychologist and I wrote down all of those fears. I wrote down all of those worries. And guess what? If I look at those worries today, they're exactly the same as what I still deal with in life. You know, whenever there's change or whenever there's something new, guarantee you, my voices will come on and say, oh, Katrina, you sure you better do that? Oh, you might not be good enough. People might not like you. You might make a mistake. Actually, it's probably better to stay within our comfort zones and maybe not take a risk, because then we won't be caught out. Then we might not fail, and then we don't have to deal with all of those feelings. And you know what? That's what our minds do. And it's great, because they're just trying to protect us. And guarantee every time you want to do something different, if you know they're going to be there, you can just learn to turn them down. Back then I didn't know this, but I just had this fear more so about what will people think about me. But working with a psychologist, I realised, okay, well, they're the things that I'm frightened about. What are the opportunities? And you know what? I could represent my country, which was my goal. I could potentially win medals. I could travel around the world, which I'm still doing. You know, I'm going to Nepal. I didn't know that I was going to be going to Nepal because I would become an athlete. I could challenge myself in a new sport. I could give my knee a rest from that crazy game of netball that I'm sure there's plenty of sore knees and ankles still in the room. But you know what? I said to myself back then, why am I so embarrassed about having a difference? What is this? This is such a big question as an 18-year-old to ask yourself. Because I don't know, if you've ever hid something, maybe you still are, because we still do it, because sometimes it's just too hard. It's so much energy that you have to pre-plan everything to make sure people don't find out. And I was using up all this energy for what? Just to answer some questions in my head about worrying about what people would think. And I thought, you know what, if I become a Paralympian, I'm going to have to learn some pretty amazing things about myself. Okay, I'm going to learn to be a great athlete, but I could also learn to love everything about myself. And if I could do that, that's an extraordinary result to have. And what about those young kids that have CP just like me? I'm sure you've seen them in your schools. Not the moderate or severe, but the mild kids. And if they don't have the genes like I did, they can be the kids that trip over a bit more often at school. They come last at sports day because, okay, they're never going to be Olympians. But if you knew their times based on Paralympics, they could potentially be the next Paralympic champion. But no one helps them know that. So they lose confidence because they're never first. And I thought, well, I went through all of that. Maybe if I'm brave enough to do this, then I could help other kids just like me. And that will make a difference for me. So that's the story behind making that decision. I then decided to go for it. I finished my netball scholarship up. I came back to Adelaide. The rest is history. I got involved in the sport of athletics. I went to Atlanta in 1996. I won 2 gold and a silver, which was extraordinary to win so early. But I got to compete on a level playing field, which was great. I went to the Sydney Games in 2000 and won 2 silver. Yes, 2 silver and a bronze. I was going for gold, but didn't get gold, which there's a story I'll tell in a second. But my last Games was in Athens in 2004, and it took me 8 years to learn a process to get back to winning gold, which was extraordinary. And I competed in the 400 metres in Athens. So what I want to do, I know I've only got probably another five more minutes just to keep you on track, and this is the very brief version of the Katrina Webb story, so I normally can speak for hours, and I run a 6-day leadership program now, so you can get lots. But this is just a bit of a snippet. I just wanted to pick out some key things that have been the real drivers for me to try and get my improvement right, to try and get the best performance out of myself. So here's a couple of things. This is sort of the biggest learning for me from the Paralympic movement, and it is such a gift. You know, after my first Games, second Games, third Games, I went to my 4th Games as an ambassador. You just meet extraordinary athletes, and this is still what motivates me. When you meet someone like Matt Stoosman, and you look at him, and I'm sure you're looking at him and going, why on earth would you choose archery? Anyone else think that? Because that's what my thoughts said. Yeah? You know, that committee meeting, or the chats you have in your own head. I look at that and go, wow, you know, he was born like this without any arms. He's got actually tiny little arms. And his actual birth parents gave him up for adoption, which is just sad in itself. But he got adopted into an extraordinary family, and he, you know, I haven't got time to tell you the whole story, but he ended up becoming an archer because all he wanted to do when he was 18, and in the part of America where he lives, to fit in when you're 18 and you become a man, what do? You go shooting. So he got a bow and arrow from the shop, and he just taught himself how he could shoot a bow and arrow, and with all that hard work and persistence, he actually became better than his friends, and a career of archery started for him. He won a silver medal in the London Games, and he has 3 sons as well, and I think that's the thing that inspired me most, because before the London Games he said to me that his oldest son had only just realised why his dad was different, because he didn't have any arms. And I just love that story, because the kids just see Dad as being the best he is with what he has. He said, my kids don't miss out on anything. We do thumb wrestles, but I just have a great big toe, he said to me. So really great story. But what I learned from, and I could tell you stories from Paralympians all day long, is, to be a Paralympic athlete, you have to be an athlete and have to have a disability. And somewhere in your life you've had to accept what you've got. Yeah? You don't see athletes at the Paralympics carrying around their negative baggage, whinging, complaining about what happened to them, blaming others. Yeah? They've dealt with change, they've gone, this is what I've got, can't change it. But you know what, I can be the best with what I've got, and that's what's going to make the difference. And you're around 4,000 athletes like that, you can't help but be motivated and inspired, because stuff happens in life. But the only thing we have control over is how we respond to it. And we either respond in a way in which we have a growth mindset, that we can learn and grow and see what we can learn from it, or we can choose to respond in a way which we then just become fixed and we say, oh, it always happens to me, I blame others, I can never achieve anything, this bad luck always happens. But this movement taught me such a gift, that I have responsibility for how I choose to react to anything that happens to me in life, and that's a part of me striving to be my absolute best. And taking that responsibility that life's there for learning, and I'm going to grow and have that mindset of growth. Here's a couple of shots of me winning my medals. But the last thing I wanted to share is these 3 principles. And I'm not going to have time to go into them, but these have been the absolute keys for making a difference to me. My first one is about process and priority management. The second one is about managing my energy, and the third one is about mind management. And if I can just touch on that first one of the reasons why I won silver in Sydney was because I had spread myself so thin and was doing so many things. I was in my final year of physio, which is full-time. I just thought you could do it. You didn't have to go part-time. You could just do everything. I was studying, I was training 30 hours, I was working 20 hours. I'd said yes to everything that come my way. I was such a good time management. I'd always get to everything. I could do lots of quantity, but my quality was pretty poor. And after I came back from Sydney, I realised in a very hard way, because losing gold is a pretty hard thing, that I'd spread myself so thin that I was performing at silver in every aspect of my life. And if I was happy with silver, and that's a question to put out there for all of you, if you're happy with that, if you're happy with the level you're at, then it's okay. But it wasn't enough for me. It just wasn't good enough. I wanted to become more of a master and learn skills instead of spreading myself too thin, so I had to make some significant changes. I couldn't get any more time, but you know what I wasn't doing well? I wasn't priority managing. Yeah? I was such a good time manager, but I actually wasn't priority managing. So one of the first things I did, and I continue to do every year, whether it's myself or my business or the people that I work for or my family or your schools, is what are your key priorities? And spend good time in that area. Work out what the process is underlying those priorities and make sure that's where the time is spent. We end up doing so many things and saying yes to so many things that we can spread ourselves so thin. We end up spending time where we really don't need to spend time. So for me to get back to a gold medal level, I had to learn what my priorities were, I had to learn what the process was, and then I had to make sure I was doing the process, the right process that was going to get me the results. So then what I did is, once I knew what my priorities were, I wrote down a list, and I continue to do this. Write down a list of every single thing I've said yes to in my life. Yeah, including my husband and including my, my 3 kids. But all those roles and committees that you've said yes to that you maybe didn't know how to say no, but you couldn't say no, so you said yes and you dealt with the consequences later. I'm sure there's many people like you that were just like me. And I went and looked at this list. My list was going on forever, because that's what happens when you spread yourself too thin. And I went, okay, I'm such a good time manager. You probably heard of the 4 Ds from Stephen Covey. Let me try and apply those 4 Ds to my life. And let me declutter. Because if we want to perform better and if we want to improve our performance and do a better job, then we need the time to do the stuff that's right. And if you're trying to win a gold medal on the track, you can't do shortcuts because you win silver. So I needed to do the time, I needed to use my time well. So do the stuff that's important. Delegate stuff. Delete stuff and delay. And really challenge yourself as a leader. Get your teachers to be challenged in this area. If you haven't got much time, then let's spend our time the best we can. The 4Ds have been incredible for me, and it's how I choose to make decisions in the future. If someone comes to me and says, Katrina, can you do this? I say, well, actually, I'm at time capacity. And I say, I'll come back to you. Then I revisit my priorities. And then if it's really important to where I need to be and it's going to improve my performance, I will say yes to it, but guess what? I have to delete, delay or delegate something else. And if I don't do that, I start to spread myself too thin again and my performance suffers again. And it's a bit of a trap for me, I know. So that has been a crucial, absolutely crucial step in for me in getting the best out of myself. And the other two areas, of course, are energy management. To perform at your absolute best, we need to make sure we re-energise ourselves physically and mentally. And I'll just ask one quick question on that. Hands up if you would spend at least one session, let's say one session a week, 30 minutes with yourself, only yourself, re-energising yourself mentally or physically. Hands up. By yourself. Yeah? Keep your hands up if it's 2. Keep your hands up if it's 3. Okay. Do you know 3 by 30, well if I said 3 by 33.333, is actually only 1% of our time. 1% of our energy. And I know this feeling that we find it hard to invest in ourselves, to re-energise ourselves physically and mentally. And if we can find that time, that only 1% of the time, to do something that makes you feel good, that gets your brain clear of all the stuff, that gets your body moving, if our teachers, if people can do this, we will perform better. Yeah, and have that energy. So there's a bit of a tip for you if that's something that could be helpful. And the last thing I'm not going to delve into, but this has been the absolute key, is to be learning how to deal with my mind. And an area for improvement for me is always, I think, if we can learn how to perform with this the best, then we can achieve anything. How do we turn down those thoughts that might be holding us back? And how do we turn up the ones that help us improve? The gift from sport is that sport and psychology are a key. They go together. Psychologists help us to perform mentally at our absolute best, and to win gold you need to get your head right. But when do we see a psychologist in life? We don't, yeah? Until we've hit rock bottom, we're stressed out, burnt out, worn out. If psychologists are there to be able to help us perform at our absolute best, I'm not saying you need to go visit one, but there is so much powerful knowledge in terms of psychology that can help us to perform better and learn how to perform our minds better. Just some ideas for you to work with your schools and your teachers to help them keep improving. So they're my 3 keys, and I continue to use these 3 things every year to make an absolute difference for my life. So I'm going to pop up this photo again to you all, and just to remind you that I've only had a short period of time to share, but I hope it just gets you thinking and to set the scene for the rest of the day of, what could your photo be? What are those results? What is something that you would love to achieve that you actually don't know that exists? But let's go beyond our goals and our KPIs and our outcomes, and let's try and think even bigger and set yourself a challenge to say, well, what could that photo be? And maybe a couple of things I've said or some stuff that's delivered today, take away a few actions that can help you to be the best you can be, to help you to embrace and drive change, to help others do the same, and really make a difference, as I said, for the people that you work with, which is our children of South Australia. So thank you very much for giving me a moment to share, and I wish you all the best and good luck. So thank you.